Yesterday's prophecies, today's headlines. This is the Hal Lindsey Report. And now, Hal Lindsey.
Good evening and welcome to this edition of the Hal Lindsey Report. A week ago in Boston, family and friends gathered for the funeral of a man named Usama Rahim. According to the Boston Globe, some 200 people attended the service at the mosque for the praising of Allah. That's not a remarkable number, except that Usama Rahim died while plotting terror acts against the United States. He was stopped for questioning by a Boston police officer and an FBI agent. By his own words, he was known for being inspired by ISIS and intent upon beheading Americans in America. Some activists knew this to be true. He was apparently angry for being stopped, so he came at them with a military-style knife. Both men shot him in self-defense. Rahim's eldest brother, Ibrahim Rahim, is an imam at a mosque in California. Without knowing any evidence, the imam wrote on Facebook, "My youngest brother, Usama Rahim, was waiting for the bus to go to his job. He was confronted by 3 Boston police officers and subsequently shot in the back 3 times. He was on his cell phone with my dear father during the confrontation, needing a witness. His last words to my father, who heard the shots, were, 'I can't breathe.'" The media reported his account as if he had been an eyewitness. Thankfully, a nearby surveillance camera captured the whole incident. Rahim was not shot in the back. He was not on his cell phone. His father could not have heard the shooting. To his credit, though, the imam seemed to change his opinion after seeing the video. But if there had been no video backing up the police report, this imam might have been fomenting a revolution. The anger at police in Boston and Ferguson would have suddenly turned into a radicalizing agent for Islam Jihad in America. Imam Ibrahim said, "We are typical middle-class American family. We are patriotic and we're loyal and we're proud citizens of this country." That may be true of most of the family, but not Rahim, and according to prosecutors, not Rahim's nephew, David Wright. He has been arrested and charged with joining his uncle's conspiracy. The family says they had no idea that Rahim and David were being radicalized. Ibrahim said Usama was an American youth. He was a very passionate and loyal to his ideas and his ideals. That's the thing keeping Homeland Security officials up at night. This typical American family, practicing a moderate version of Islam, produced a monster, and it is not an isolated event. It's happening all over the world, but especially in the United States. Moderate Muslim parents teach their children to revere the Quran, and when they study the Quran, literally, it sets them up to be radicalized. The recent shooting in Garland, Texas, has been transformed by the media into a story about the appropriateness of drawing cartoons about Muhammad. They're missing the main point. Events in Garland show that ISIS is here in America right now. We've been saying they were coming. We've heard the reports of ISIS a few miles from Texas. But now, we know radical jihad is already here. FBI Director James Comey calls ISIS a chaotic spiderweb. He said, "We have investigations of people in various stages of radicalizing in all 50 states. The Quran demands that every verse be literally interpreted and followed. So it is just a matter of time for the serious inquirer to become radicalized." I'm not as concerned about the people being investigated by the FBI now as I am about the ones not yet on the FBI's radar. Fortunately, the jihadists caught so far don't have enough sense to keep their loony ideas off the social media. But it's the smart ones I fear. They're the ones with the ability to come up with the big, dangerous plots. They're the ones who know enough to stay out of the FBI's sights. The number remains small now, but if they only want to foment terror, one or two people with imagination and a willingness to die can wreak havoc. And though small, the numbers are growing, particularly in American prisons. According to a Fox News report, a former U.S. Marine who became a Muslim radical, gang leader, and bodyguard to the blind sheikh behind the 1993 World Trade Center bombing is so adept at turning fellow prisoners into potential extreme jihadists that Florida prison officials have kept him shackled and in solitary confinement for the last 3 years. And federal authorities want a judge to tack on another 3 decades. This one man, Marcus Robertson, has reportedly created over 150 followers that federal law enforcement officials are keeping an eye on. We don't know how many there are out there like him, but we know prisons are fertile ground for recruiting and creating Islamic extremists. The United Nations recently released the first draft of its annual list of shame. That's their list of children's rights violators. As expected, the draft contained groups like ISIS, Boko Haram, and Al-Qaeda. It also included, though, the nation of Israel, supposedly for offenses that occurred in last year's war with Hamas. A group called Human Rights Watch pushed hard to include Israel on the list. I've talked a lot about HRW before. They have turned the demonization of Israel into a money-making proposition. They severely and wrongly condemn Israel's treatment of Palestinians. Then they use that position to raise vast sums of money from wealthy Middle Eastern states that hate Israel. The irony is they raise their anti-Israel money from countries with some of the worst human rights records in the world. Human Rights Watch says that it wants Israel on the list in order to give the UN increased leverage against the Jewish state. Their statement says inclusion of a party on the Secretary General's list triggers an increased response from the UN and potential Security Council sanctions, such as arms embargoes, travel bans, and asset freezes. The United Nations assault on Israel is also an assault on common sense. International law recognizes that there will be civilian casualties in wars. It's a sad but known phenomenon, and international law makes provision for it. However, Israel is held to a different standard. For Israel, all civilian casualties are considered a criminal offense. Never mind that many of those casualties are a result of Hamas using civilians as human shields. Never mind that the stated objective of Hamas is the genocide of the whole Jewish race. Never mind that Israel has given up lands and security in its quest for peace, only to be rebuffed time and again. But eventually, with enough rockets launched randomly into Israeli civilian population centers, Israel fights back. And when they do, the UN, the most hypocritical institution on earth, goes after, guess who? Israel. From all reports, President Obama and Samantha Power, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, worked hard behind the scenes to prevent Israel from being included on the list of shame. Also, despite the president's warnings to Prime Minister Netanyahu, the United States continues to thwart a UN-imposed two-state solution. Some speculate that the president wants to avoid anything that would rile up Congress before his Iranian nuclear pact is concluded. In any case, for now, the United States is holding strong for Israel at the United Nations. As a result, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, who makes the final decision, elected to omit Israel from the list. Though deciding not to include Israel on the list of shame, Ban took the opportunity to criticize the Israelis. He said, "The unprecedented and unacceptable scale of the impact on children in 2014 raises grave concerns about Israel's compliance with the international humanitarian law, notably the principles of distinction, proportionality, and precaution in attack, and respect for international human rights law, particularly in relation to excessive use of force." Unbelievably, Ban also decided to leave Hamas off the list too. Just when the UN seemed to make a wise decision, they negate it with a stupid one. On the boycott, divestment, and sanctions front, there's good news and bad news. In May, the Illinois legislature passed a bill against boycotts of Israel. The bill passed unanimously and is expected to become a model for other states. However, the BDS movement was then given an injection of new life from the French telecom giant Orange, partially owned by the French government. The company had been a target of BDS activists over the last several months. At a press conference in Egypt last week, Orange CEO Stéphane Richard told reporters, "Our intention is to withdraw from Israel. It will take time, but for sure we'll do it." He said that if he could, he would do this tomorrow morning. The statement caused quite a furor in both France and Israel. 3 days later, in response to the outcry over the statement, Richard said, "Let me make it very clear that the Orange Group is in Israel to stay." He added, "We love Israel." Right. They love Israel, but want to harm it. They're in Israel to stay, but would leave tomorrow morning if they could. In Cairo, Richard said, "I know that it is a sensitive issue here in Egypt, but not only in Egypt. We want to be one of the trustful partners of all Arab countries." And that's the key. He wants to position his company for expansion in wealthy Muslim Arab regions. To do that, he was willing to become an anti-Semite. Even the liberal Israeli politician Isaac Herzog called the boycott movement a new form of terrorism. So far, BDS has had little impact on Israel's economy, but the Bible predicts a future siege of Israel that will be so severe that it will turn ordinary people into cannibals. Last week, the government announced that the Office of Personnel Management, that's OPM, was hacked for the second time in less than a year, probably by the Chinese. According to Reuters, data stolen from U.S. government computers by suspected Chinese hackers included security clearance information and background checks dating back 3 decades. Think of OPM as the federal government's human resource department. It issues security clearances and compiles records on every employee and former employee of the federal government. The hackers access the records of up to 4 million of those people. Each of the 4 million now faces the nightmare of identity theft, but that's not the worst part. These records include security clearances and background checks. The hackers now know who has high-level security clearances and who doesn't, and why. They know things about these employees that the employees themselves don't even know. This is just the latest in a series of high-profile hacks of the federal government that we know about. Hackers have successfully breached security at the State Department, White House, and Pentagon, among others. After the White House intrusion last October, an unnamed official here told the Washington Post, We identified activity of concern on the unclassified Executive Office of the President Network. But as we're learning with the Hillary Clinton email scandal, unclassified data often contains intelligence the nation's enemies find valuable. In World War II, they said, "Loose lips sink ships." Sometimes seemingly trivial information can provide clues to troop movements or identities of espionage agents. Another White House official told the Post, "On a regular basis, there are bad actors out there who are attempting to achieve intrusions into our systems. This is a constant battle for the government and our sensitive government computer systems. So it's always a concern for us that individuals are trying to compromise systems and get access to our networks." Even though the official acknowledged that this is a constant battle for the government, he again downplayed the seriousness of the situation. He said, "It's always a concern for us that individuals are trying to compromise systems." While individuals are a concern, of more concern is the hacking done by foreign governments, terrorist organizations, and even businesses seeking an advantage in dealing with the government. Any of these things can be deadly for our soldiers and can cause real and lasting damage to national security. The problem with hacking is that computers run everything, including electrical grids, banks, and financial markets. If a foreign government could take control of any one among various U.S. computer systems, it could effectively shut down the country. What might North Korea do with such knowledge? Their successful hack of Sony Pictures proves that they are investing heavily in this form of warfare. Connected computers are the collectors of the government's secrets. From them, hackers can potentially learn about everything from next-generation weapons to the sexual activities of Americans in key government positions and private sector positions. A foreign government, a terrorist organization, or a corporation that wants favorable treatment can blackmail a potential presidential candidate. We saw accusations last week of the lengths former Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert, was willing to go to hide a dark past. His accused blackmailer only wanted money. It is a national embarrassment, but it could have become a national disaster. At one time, Hastert stood second in line for the presidency of the United States. In Luke 12, we see Jesus sending his disciples out on their first mission without his direct presence. He sent them out to proclaim the kingdom of God and to perform healing, and he said to them, "Take nothing for your journey, neither a staff, nor a bag, nor bread, nor money, and do not even have 2 tunics apiece." He reminded them of this experience on the night he celebrated Passover with his disciples shortly before he was crucified. He said to them, "When I sent you out without purse and bag and sandals, you did not lack anything, did you?" And they said, "No, nothing." And he said to them, "But now let him who has a purse take it along, likewise also a bag, and let him who has no sword sell his robe and buy one." It was important for them to understand that financial and physical security comes from God. Their first mission trip proved it. "You did not lack anything, did you?" And they said, "No, nothing." So with that lesson learned, he then taught them something else. God performs miracles, but he wants our participation. God heals, but we should still eat right. God rescues our finances, but we should still be prudent in stewardship of his money. That's why Jesus told his disciples to carry a bag and a sword. God takes care of us, but he usually chooses to involve us. By telling them to buy swords, Jesus was not telling them to be violent. He's the one who said, "Blessed are the peacemakers. Agree with your adversary quickly." A couple of hours after telling them to buy swords, he gave this warning: all who draw the sword will die by the sword. He told them to arm themselves, but he admonished them not to live by the sword. Romans 12:18 puts it like this: if possible, so far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men. For most of us, today's sword would be a gun. There are many reasons why you might not choose to arm yourself, including legal restrictions in your area, or what you may perceive as dangers to the children who live or visit your home. But don't fall into the trap of saying, I follow Jesus, the Prince of Peace. Therefore, I will not arm myself. Some people make it a tenet of their faith. Others ask, what would Jesus do? They imagine the bland, unblinking movie version of Jesus and say to themselves, Jesus would just let the bad guys kill him and murder his family. But we don't need to speculate on what Jesus would do. We know what Jesus said. Let him who has no sword sell his robe and buy one. Why would the Prince of Peace advise his followers to arm themselves? To some, it may seem counterintuitive, but an armed citizenry actually means less violence, not more. Texas has one of the most generous open carry laws in the United States. A 2013 Texas Department of Public Safety study found that only 0.3% of convicted crimes in Texas were committed by those holding a concealed handgun license. In 1982, Miami had highest per capita homicide rate in the country. Houston came in number 3, but that was before right-to-carry laws passed in Florida and Texas. Not long ago, Business Insider magazine ranked that 25 most dangerous cities in America. Neither Miami nor Houston even made the list. In fact, no Florida or Texas cities made the list. When Neighborhood Scouts did a study of the most dangerous cities, Miami had fallen to the 46th place and Houston to 63rd. Cities with strong anti-gun laws have had the murder rates increase relative to other cities in the last couple of decades. Gun control proponents point out that violent crime rates in those cities have decreased, and that is true. But it didn't happen because of more stringent gun laws. Violent crime went down across the board all over the country. Rates of violent crime have gone down because incarceration rates have gone through the roof. I agree with those who say having so many people in prison is a tragedy, but I think the tragedy is that it has been necessary. The numbers that leave no doubt. Throwing criminals in jail makes our city safer. Sadly, the trend toward less violent crime seems to be ending now, especially in places like Baltimore, New York, Detroit, and Chicago, places with strong gun laws. Statistics, especially for the year, show those numbers exploding. As unreasonable as it may sound to some people, allowing a law-abiding citizen to be armed actually lowers the crime rate and raises security for everyone. The bigger picture is this: we need to trust God with our lives. That means live where and how He wants. He doesn't want us to be self-centered in our thinking, always obsessing over things that might happen to us and our families. But He also wants us to live responsibly in an uncertain era. That may be as simple as having a fairly large stock of canned goods on hand and a way to store extra water. It may mean owning a weapon. Just remember that in most areas of our lives, God wants us to be His partners. He wants us in the loop. He wants you to be a member of the team. That's why we read 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 10. If anyone is not willing to work, then he is not to eat either. God can feed you, but to the extent you're able, He wants you to get out there and work. Do your part. And the amazing thing is that God, who created the whole universe, will be your partner. Well, that's it for tonight, folks. God willing, I'll see you next week.
You've been watching the Hal Lindsey Report. To support this program, send your tax-deductible gift to Hal Lindsey Media Ministries, P.O. Box 470-470, Tulsa, Oklahoma 74147. You can also support this ministry online. Visit hallindsey.com or call 1-888-RAPTURE.